Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vergil McKenzie. I am the Chief of Labor and Employee Relations for the Northeast region. And today on our agenda, I want to do a few things. I'm going to basically take you through a walkthrough of the new Department of Interior Performance Management System policy changes. We're also going to do an overview of the performance management cycle in general, and then answer some questions and answers. All right, so let's get started. So, as most of you know, a few weeks ago you were notified that the Department of Interior had came down with some new guidance and some changes to our existing performance management system. So real quickly, I just want to speak about the reason that the department went to that change. All right, and so federal law really only allows agencies to take action to remove or demote employees who perform at an unacceptable level. All right, so allowing employees to receive minimally successful ratings, which our old performance system had, allowed them to continue indefinitely, which sort of impeded the DOI mission from being accomplished efficiently. And so the department looked at a different system, and part of that system was going from a 5-tier system where there was a minimally successful standard to a 4 system, and I'll sort of talk about that in depth. But basically, the 5-level rating system, it did pose some challenges for managers to address minimally successful performance. It allowed those marginal performers to just go indefinitely without much consequence. So this new policy is more consistent with President Trump's and Secretary Zinke's priorities, and they're looking to strengthen accountability from an agency level and also streamline the procedures for being able to deal with poor performers. All right, so let's talk about what's changing. So government-wide regulations governs their rating level, that pattern that agencies can use when they develop a performance management system. And so under our old rating system that many of you are aware of already, it went from exceptional, which is the highest, down to unsatisfactory, and in between you had superior, fully successful, and minimally successful. This new rating system, there's 4 standards, and those would be outstanding, which is the highest level, followed by exceeds expectations, and fully successful, and at the bottom tier would be unacceptable. So some name changes there, as well as the removal of that minimal successful standard. There were a few other policy changes, probably not as significant as removing the minimally successful, one of which was the shorter deadline to establish performance plans, and that's reduced from 60 days, which it was current under the former system, to now 45 days. All right, under the new system, it also places additional responsibilities on senior managers to hold subordinate managers responsible for failures and managing the performance management duties. Previously, fully successful performers were not eligible to receive performance-based awards, and now they are. Does not necessarily mean that they will receive an award at the fully successful level, but now they're eligible to, which is quite a difference. The new policy also eliminates the requirement that employees who were not contesting their rating of record be allowed to attach written comments. And so formerly, it was a requirement that employees be allowed to do that, and that was more from a bureau level. Now bureaus have the option to still allow that, but it's not a requirement. Some additional policy changes were the new policy addressed the rating eligibility requirements for Intergovernmental Personnel Act, which is basically employees who sort of temporarily come in and out of federal, state, and local government. It eliminates the PIP terminology. So formerly, when an employee was deemed to be unacceptable, they were put on a PIP, and now that language is more aligned with federal regulations, and is now called a Notice of Opportunity to Demonstrate Acceptable Performance. I know it's a little bit longer name, but it's again, it's more aligned with federal regulations. I think we should call it a NODAP. You heard it here first. The new policy also incorporates some other changes. It limits generally opportunity periods that we were just speaking about to 30 days. All right. It also encourages managers to use procedures under 5 CFR 752, which is the conduct standard. to address poor performance when it's appropriate. It clarifies the procedures between 5 CFR 752, conduct, and 5 CFR 432, performance, does not apply to Bureau of Indian Education contract educators. Won't see too much of this stuff here in the National Park Service, as it deals with, obviously, Bureau of Indian Education. And so, when did this go into effect? So the policy became effective October 1st. Blame me for delivering it late. I apologize. We wanted to make sure all of our ducks were in a row. We wanted to make sure that everyone had a full understanding of it. But the policy is in effect as of fiscal year 19, October 1st. Fiscal year 18 EPAPs will be closed out under the former system. And ratings of record should be based under the previous system where there were 5 levels. So you may have some employees who would receive a minimal successful under that former system, and it's fine under that closeout. This new policy will not impact ratings. It will not impact awards. As I stated, it will not impact the closeout of the former year's performance. All right, with that being said, beginning October 1st, all employees are under the new fiscal year 19 EPAP with the 4 standard level system. All right, there's been some changes in the forms. So the DI 3100, which is for most employees, non-supervisory, has been updated to sort of reflect that new rating level and the descriptions. The DI 3100S, which are the supervisory forms, does include some mandatory language that is applicable to supervisors and managers. And it indicates that their critical elements and samples has a fully successful performance standard. There's also an update to performance-based award policies, and that will be coming in the near future. Here's some resources, and I think when we sent out the initial information with regards to the call, there were a number of websites down there. If not, you can reach out to me. I'll make sure that you get this, and in fact, I'll just double check after the call to make sure that everyone has this website to download some more information.
Virgil?
I'm here, Don.
There's a question about the notice of opportunity policy in effect for staff going under the PIP due to the FY18 rating.
Okay.
So how to deal with that is Tom Rogers' question.
Okay.
In the chat.
So Tom, if you I would appreciate, just hold that for just a moment, because I'm going to actually get into the PIP and how the new policy is effective for employees who were previously on a PIP, because there are some nuances that you need to be aware of, and then how the new the policy beginning fiscal year 19, the changes would impact employees who may have been under performance deficiency. So just hold that question. I will absolutely come back to you. All right, so implementation next steps. Part of what we want to accomplish is to make sure that management is aware of the new policy and expectations for managing these employees, and evaluate whether Bureau-specific procedures need to be updated or improved. So notice was given to all of us in the field and human resources for us to sort of provide out to the union. And for the Northeast region, we've made all unions aware of the changes and given them an opportunity to engage in bargaining. So on September 4th, you see here, the policy was shared with the LR community. And part of what we're supposed to do in human resources and labor relations is make sure that we fulfill our obligation, which is to provide that information to the union. A couple of things to remember or to note, that the change of a new performance management system is generally non-negotiable. So as an agency, we don't generally have to negotiate affecting a performance management system, and which includes the levels and the content of those elements and standards. We may need to negotiate over the impact and implementation of that. And so at this point, it's up to the union to raise the issue of wanting to negotiate where there's some conflict between the policy and any CBA, or something that's not covered in an existing CBA that they would like to bargain over. All right, and so Tom, this hopefully this gets into what you're looking for, and if not, just drop another note in the chat, and I'll get to it. So let's talk about the impact of this new system on those poor performers. So specifically, employees who at some time during the fiscal year 18, if they completed an opportunity period. So if they went through a PIP, which is the formal language, and they achieved an acceptable level of performance, so under that previous system, minimally successful was all they needed to achieve, that employee would have passed the opportunity period. All right, so the employee in that category should be issued a rating of record to close out fiscal year 18, and then given a new performance plan under the new system for fiscal year 19, effective October 1st. Now, normally what happens is when an employee is placed under a PIP, they would generally have 1 year from the time that they're initially placed on that PIP to maintain that performance. All right, so with the elimination of this minimally successful standard, the agency is essentially raising the bar on what is defined as an acceptable level of performance. What does that mean for us? It means that if an employee fails to perform within that 1 year period of time, normally under the old system, we would have been able to move right to a notice of a removal or a demotion or so on and so forth. Now, because the rating system has changed and we've essentially raised that bar, we want employees to go under a new opportunity period. All right, and so this is really based on MSP precedent. And so it basically said that when an agency raises the bar on what's deemed acceptable performance and it eliminates the performance standard that was essential to the successful completion of an opportunity period, the agency should not harm the employee and provide them a new opportunity under the new system. All right, so let's talk about employees who began an opportunity right short of the end of the rating cycle. So if the employee fails to achieve acceptable level of performance under the prior rating system, that's a minimally successful, the agency can proceed with action removal, demotion, reassignment as previous. If that employee's performance raised to at least minimally successful during that opportunity period, same as before, that employee is deemed to have passed that period. All right, they must be issued a minimally successful rating or higher, and then a new performance plan would be effective beginning October 1st. That does not include that minimally successful level. So just to sort of reiterate, if they improved and they were at least minimally successful, when you close them out, they're going to have at least a minimally successful rating on the former system. You don't worry about that. Just make sure that under the new system, you put them under standards. It's going to eliminate that minimally successful standard. All right, and the same procedures apply to those employees as other employees who successfully complete an opportunity period in the prior year. If that performance drops after they've successfully completed an opportunity period, they would essentially be granted a new period under the new standard. All right, so employees who receive a minimally successful summary rating for fiscal 18 and then have a within grade increase due in the first 90 days of the year, the rating year. So to receive a within grade, all employees must have at least fully successful. Below fully successful, even minimally successful under the former system, they would not be eligible. So in this case, the employee's current rating of record would be used to deny that within grade. All right, so within grade delay would not be appropriate as the employee has been given a performance rating with the minimum period of time before the end of the waiting period. So in other words, that employee had enough time under the waiting period to demonstrate. So you don't need to wait until the employee can be rated under the new performance system. It's completely fine. They've served time under the old rating system. They were deemed not to be fully successful. You do not have to afford them additional time. All right. If the within grade is due after that employee's first 90 days under this new performance system, supervisors or managers are going to evaluate them employees under the new system, and then if appropriate, give them an interim rating, and that's going to be used to determine whether their within grade is granted at that time. All right. If the employee's performance is unacceptable, supervisors now are going to move forward with taking action as prescribed. So that would be a notice of opportunity to improve, because remember, if they're not fully successful, they are unacceptable. All right, so before I just go into the performance management cycle, are there any questions about just some of the changes with the new performance system? I'll unmute. I'll let you guys.
Oh, okay.
Okay, folks, so keep your phones on mute.
Phones on mute, and
Okay.
you can unmute if you have a question.
Okay.
So, Vergil, I just muted everybody. If we can just have people ask a question in the chat or put their name in, and then I'll locate their name and unmute them myself.
Okay, and just let me know.
So if you have a question, just go ahead and put your name in the chat and say, I have a question, and we'll locate your name.
All right, so I'll continue, and then we'll just monitor the chat for any questions that may come in. So just want to do a quick run through of the performance management cycle. And so who's covered? All permanent and temporary employees are covered by the policy, except presidential appointees, SES employees, senior level employees, scientific and professional, temporary and or accepted service employees whose appointments are less than 120 days within a 12-month period, employees who are outside the United States, administrative law judges, and employees occupying other positions that are excluded by OPM. Pretty much everyone else is included in this performance management cycle. And just to talk about why it's really, really important. Performance management essentially tightens that link between strategic organizational objectives and those sort of day-to-day things that employees do. So it sort of matches up the day-to-day performance with the ultimate organizational goals. Provides visibility and clarifies accountability related to performance expectations, documents individual performance, and that performance supports other actions, promotions, awards, etc. Regularly tracking progress against these performance goals and objectives also gives opportunities for us to recognize and reward employees for their performance.
So, Vergil, I'm going to go ahead and unmute Tom's phone, see if he has we can verbalize that question he had.
All right.
Right, Tom,
are you there?
Oh, yes. So just to clarify, let's talk about, let's assume a rating for FY18 of unacceptable, and the performance period hasn't started yet. The opportunity period starts now, or next week, or whatever. But it's based on the FY18 rating, so does the employee raise performance up to minimally successful? And is the period 30 days or 60 days?
So let me back up. So when was the employee's performance noted to be deficient?
Well, that's counseling. Let's say counseling happened, and discussions were held with the employee, and et cetera. But the
so, well, let me just help you out, and then you can sort of answer the question. So, if the employee began the opportunity period before the end of the the fiscal year 18 rating cycle versus the 19, is very important as to what needs to happen. So, are you saying that the employee was placed on a PIP prior to the closeout, or is this under the new fiscal year standard?
No PIP has started, and it's begun.
Okay, gotcha. So we're under fiscal year. So we're under fiscal year 19 as of now. And so first things first is we have to make sure all employees are under standards because you can't act on any of them until they're under standards. But, okay, so take it from there. Tom, you still there?
Yes. So put the so issue an FY19 plan and
yes.
PIP. Okay. Using the FY19, and therefore it'll fall under the October 1st guidance.
Correct.
Okay.
So anything, right? You want to make sure that the employee is under standards first, and then from that point, and ideally, you want to give them 90 days under the standards before you start taking action on them.
Well, but it would be based on the rating of record from FY18.
Gotcha. Okay. So you've determined that they are unacceptable based on their performance under 18.
Yes.
Okay, but you don't affect it until 19.
Right. So the rating of record comes in and it's unacceptable. All right. Now, October 31st, it's time to get on a PIP.
Yes. So that's fine. So you would basically, you're going to give them the time to perform. They're under 19's performance plan at this point.
You mean in the notice period?
When you say, so what do you mean? Take me back. So you're going to put them on a performance standard. You're going to reference performance deficiencies from the prior rating year, which is the fiscal 18.
Right.
Right, and then you're going to still give them the new. You're under the new standard, so you're going to give them a time to perform, and then at the conclusion of that time to perform, you'll assess whether they were successful or not.
Okay. And when you say time to perform, do you mean that's the notice? That's the opportunity period, or not?
Right. So the notice of opportunity to improve is what's putting them on a PIP. So it's no longer known as a PIP under the new performance plan. It's just a notice of opportunity. So that's the initial notice. That's the mechanism that's going to place them on the time to improve.
Right. Are you saying we issue that now as planned, or we go under a new plan and see if things aren't unacceptable anymore somehow?
No. Yeah, no. So this is so. You don't. So I want to make sure that you don't confuse. You can put them on an opportunity period at any point in the rating year, but we're under the new performance plan now, and there's only a few nuances with regards to putting them under that plan. One of those is that the time is shortened to generally 30 days, and I'll sort of cover that a little bit more. But generally, they'll have a shorter period of time under the opportunity period to demonstrate that performance. There are some differences or some exceptions to that period, but generally they're going to be given about 30 days. Then at the end of that 30 days, you're going to make a determination of whether they were successful or not. If they were not successful, then you're going to proceed with an adverse action, and that would be a demotion or a proposed removal. So this is under the new plan. So most of the difference between whether the employee started the opportunity period in 18 or 19 just really surrounds what happens if that employee improves. Because normally, just to take you back again, under the old system, this is actually under the current system too, but because we changed, there are some differences. But previously, if an employee was placed on a PIP, right, and they improve at the end of that PIP, some employees improve during the opportunity period and then later decline. So the way that it worked previously was that if that employee was under a PIP, and then within a year from the time that it was initially issued, if they were to drop again, you would be able to go right to a proposed action, which would be a demotion or a proposed removal. So if they were under a PIP under the old performance plan, so under 18, and then that they improved from a PIP and then declined again under the new system, instead of proposing that new adverse action, removal or demotion, we're saying that you give them a new opportunity to improve under the new performance plan. Does that make sense?
I've got that. I just want to be clear on if you're suggesting the opportunity period begins now with a new plan, or if the opportunity period begins 90 days from now, when we have a graded rating of record in hand.
Yeah, no. So you don't have to wait for the rating of record. That's an important distinction. At any time during a rating year, any time. It can be at the closeout. It can be 2 months or 3 months into the rating cycle. If you determine that the employee's performance is unacceptable, you can provide them an opportunity. Obviously, you're going to work with Labor and Employee Relations to be able to document that deficiency, but you don't have to wait to any particular time before you place them on an opportunity to improve. So that can occur 2 days into the new ratings period. It can be 6 months into the rating period. So there is no trigger in terms of an action by management, a rating of record or mid-year approval. It's just your monitoring of the employee's work.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
So Vergil, there's a question from the group on how long do employees need to be on a period of performance before you can put them on a no-DAB? Is it after 30 days of performance or under the EPAB? And that's in the chat.
How long before an employee can be placed on? So at any point, this is similar to Tom's question, pretty much at any point throughout the rating cycle, you can place an employee under on an opportunity period. Now, generally speaking, employees would always be under a standard. So they're either under the prior standard or they're going to be under a new standard. So if you don't have to wait until the beginning of a rating cycle or the end of a rating cycle or mid-year at any point that they're deemed to be unacceptable. The one caveat I would say we would probably want to work on is if it was a brand new employee or an employee where there was never a period to have observed them under their standards. That would be a little bit different. But an employee who was 9 months into the rating year have time under their standards to observe them, and you can determine that they're unacceptable then. And that time can cross over rating year. So it can start in one rating year and it can cross over into another rating year. All right, so any other questions on that? Does that make sense to you? All right, so we'll just monitor it for more. If that's not clear, we can talk about it some more. Some key roles in a performance management cycle. So the senior managers, bureau heads, they establish the organizational performance and strategic goals. Part of their jobs under this new performance cycle is to hold those subordinate managers accountable for essentially fulfilling their duties under the performance management system. The reviewing officials who are generally the second level supervisors, they review and approve the highest and lowest ratings, outstanding and unacceptable. And sometimes they prepare performance ratings when the rating official, due to certain circumstances, may not be appropriate. And they also hold subordinate supervisors and managers accountable for failing to fulfill their performance management duties. All right. Those who are new. The rating official, which is generally the first level supervisor, this is the person that works with the employee, establishes performance plans, those critical elements, and those standards. They define what that performance should look like with the employees. Essentially manages and evaluates the employee performance, and they ultimately, assuming that they have enough time observing the employee, they would assign a performance rating. The employee, we want all employees just to perform under their plans and achieve at least fully successful. Remember, now they cannot achieve a minimally successful rating because it does not exist anymore. All right, so let's just talk about performance planning for a little bit. One of the biggest steps in the performance planning cycle is just developing the performance plans. It probably takes a lot of time and work and a lot of thought. What's involved with it? It involves the critical elements. These are the things that employees do. It involves performance standards as discussed. This is just the level of how well the employee has performed under the plan. And how are these documented? They're documented using DI 3100, which is for non-supervisory employees, or the DI 3100S, which is for supervisory employees. And I know I stated a little bit earlier, but brand new, performance plans must be established within 45 days of a few events. One is the beginning of the appraisal period. So as of right now, you have until about November 15th to actually have those standards issued to your employees to be in compliance. Or when an employee enters on duty, or that employee is assigned to a new position, or assigned to a detail or temp promotion that is going to last for 120 days, all right, or that employee is assigned to a new rating official. So all of those things are the triggers of when a new performance plan must be established, but and you have 45 days from any of those events to do that. All right, so critical elements. Remember, these are things that encompasses the core duties of the job. Each performance plan must have at least one, but no more than 5 critical elements. At least one of those critical elements must be linked to a strategic goal. And I reached out to the department to get a little clarification on that. That strategic goal can be from the National Park Service level, and there's no mandate that it's a specific thing, so you may want to just check with your senior management staff. But it just basically wants to link that employee's performance to our organizational goals, so they can sort of tie into how the employee's production affects our goals. Performance plans for all supervisors must include a mandatory supervisory managerial critical element, just generally in critical element 1. All right, and so the performance standards. Department-wide standards are available for each of the 4 levels of performance. So we have a benchmark for all of them. Federal regulations require that we at least have a fully successful level benchmark, but at the National Park Service, we have one identified for each level. So that would be from unacceptable all the way up to outstanding. Importantly, supervisors are encouraged to develop more specific standards that sort of drill down to the core duties of a job. So although there are benchmark standards, what you want to do as managers is you want to establish other standards or supplement to the standards that speak specifically to that employee's performance in their role. All right, let's talk about the implications of the PD on the performance standard. The position description essentially is that document that describes the core duties and other duties that are inherent in a particular employee's job. And so classification standards determine the nature of work activities for any particular position. And so, for example, under this example here, the activities of a petroleum engineer are different from those of an electrical engineer. So it would be inappropriate to use a PD for petroleum engineer, obviously for electrical engineer. I'm hoping that's common sense. So we want to make sure that position descriptions speak to the work that the employee does. All right, so performance standards build on classification standards by describing what accomplishments an employee must make at certain positions at each grade level. All right, so rating officials. One thing that you must do is you want to encourage all of your employees at the beginning of the period when you're going to discuss standards, is give your employees an opportunity to engage in dialogue and have some input into the drafting of those standards. It's always going to be management's final say, but it's a good practice, and we want to encourage all management to solicit feedback from your employees, and you can do that individually or as a group, but you want to solicit input for them, and when appropriate, include those in those standards. A performance plan is established when it's signed by the rating official and issued to the employee. We would like employees' signatures on EPAPs to acknowledge receipt, but it is not essential to that document being valid. And the responsibility for and the final decision regarding those critical elements, as I stated, always rests with management. All right, and so let's talk about monitoring performance through the rating cycle. Ongoing performance monitoring is critical. You want to be able to assess how employees are doing, and you want to be able to identify and resolve performance problems early, but even more importantly, you want to appraise employees of that information. So employees should always know where they stand at in the performance cycle. It should really be of no surprise at any point that their rating is what it ultimately is. All right, and so there are two 2 points in a year that you are, as managers, required to provide reviews. I think most of you already know this. Obviously, the annual rating, that's when you're going to have your annual discussion to address that final rating. And then one progress review, we call it a mid-year review. That's sometime between, let's say, May and July. If you have a large group of employees, you may even want to stagger them at stagger them at some point through the mid-year between May and July, so that you're not overwhelmed with sort of trying to do it at once. So it's not necessary to have it exactly at mid-year, but just sort of in that mid-year point. As indicated right here, one of the most important things is to document. You must document. I can't stress documentation enough. It is the crux of being able to support any action that you take as management. Once you contact Labor and Employee Relations for assistance when you notice deficiencies, what we are going to look for is documentation to support that. Without that documentation, it's hard to establish a case, a winnable case, before a third party. So I want to encourage you to make sure that you record employee performance, record counseling, conversations that relate to an employee's performance. You want to make sure you document that. There's no standard in which you must do that most of the time. So emails can suffice if you're having a conversation. They can be memos. They can be written on a napkin if you can file it away well. Just make sure that you have some documentation to substantiate an employee's performance. You want to make sure you have documentation to substantiate your advice or counsel to them, and you want to store it in a file the moment that you start to notice deficiencies. And even when employees are doing well, so you want to use that documentation to substantiate a fair, great, or better than great performance. All right, so let's talk about what happens if an employee's position changes during the appraisal period. All right, so if the employee is on a detail or a temp promotion that's more than 120 days, that employee must have a performance plan established under that temporary assignment by that temporary assigned manager. All right, once completed, that supervisor, that detail or that temp promotion supervisor will provide an interim rating. So they'll do an appraisal just for the period of time that the employee was under the detail, and that's given to the employee and that's given to the employee's manager. And when that official manager of record prepared the rating at the end of the year, he would use that interim rating to supplement his own monitoring of their performance. All right, so employee position changes during an appraisal period. So to be eligible for rating, employees on IPAs must, and this may not apply to most of us, but have a critical element performance standard for that IPA assigned that was approved by interior supervisor of record. They must have been under an opportunity performance plan for 90 days during the appraisal period, and they must have received performance input from that IPA supervisor, which is somebody from the Department of Interior. If an employee's position changes during the appraisal period, so that position change could be via reassignment or promotion or demotion. So if the employee served at least 90 days under a performance plan, the rating official for the old employee must give an interim rating. All right, and that interim rating is provided to the employee and it's provided to the new employee's rating official. The new rating official must immediately put that employee on performance. They'll have up to 45 days to do that. And then that interim rating must be considered by the new rating official when it's time to prepare appraisals at the end of the year. All right, so sometimes you'll have a rating official that changes during the appraisal year, and a departing rating official must complete an interim rating for any employee who's had 90 days under a performance plan. Really important here, because this comes up a lot. If a rating official leaves in the final 90 days, so all of our employees are under a fiscal year rating cycle. So if the rating official leaves any time after July 1st, that rating official should prepare a summary rating, which is a final rating of record for that appraisal period. There will be no need to prepare an additional rating by September 30th. So once again, if any time after July 1st, the rating official leaves, that rating official prepares a final summary rating for the employee, and that rating is going to serve as the rating of record. All right, and so let's talk about employee development. It can come in one of two ways, informal or formal. The keys to remember about providing development to your employees is make it specific, give feedback as stated, so let employees know what they're doing. Allow employees to rotate jobs or do special assignments, and provide coaching when appropriate for the employee. Formal, when is traditional training classroom. Some of this is required by the job, but other times there may be formal training classes that would help an employee improve. And so you want to see if it's in a budget. Provide your employees with opportunities to attend formal classroom training. Allow them to apply the details. So as their supervisors of record, you have to sign off on their ability to apply for details, and you make sure you do that. And then other forms of formal development are self-study. So sometimes employees take it upon themselves to track down their own training. They may request it from you. Some of it may be from the Department of Interior. Some of it may be outside. These are all effective means of helping employees develop. And so we'll talk about rating performance. So just the simple eligibility requirements. To be eligible for a performance rating, an employee has to be either permanent, full-time, or part-time, and they must be under a performance standard for 90 days. Alternatively, they can be a temporary employee if they work more than 120 days during their appraisal period and they were supervised by the same rating official for at least 90 days. All right. If you have a scenario where, let's say, for example, an employee is nearing the end of the rating period, they don't quite have 90 days under the rating official or under any rating official who's observed that employee for that period of time, that's an opportunity to extend that rating period beyond the September 30th deadline. And the goal is to give the employee the full 90-day complement under one rating official so that that employee can receive a end-of-year rating. And Dom, did you want to stop? And I see a couple questions came in here.
I think Kelly's question was that they were asking the question before. You said that if somebody retires July 1st, then they have to have the summary rating, and they wanted to know if they retired before. And okay, I believe that would mean that they would have 90 days to be under standards, so you could put them under new standards.
Right, so absolutely correct. So if the rating official retires, Kelly, before July 1st, that retiring official or that rating official at that point really should provide a summary rating. So if the rating official fails to do it, then it really should come from the secondary. But bottom line is that there would be a interim appraisal used at that point, and as Dom stated, they can go into new standards because they would have greater than 90 days before the completion of the rating year. And so that rating official at the end would use the time under the new standards and then the interim appraisal that they received from the former manager to do a final rating. And from Connie, you said if one element is unacceptable, will the entire summary be unacceptable? Yes, if one element, any one element is unacceptable, the employee's summary rating is unacceptable. And I will talk about that in just a moment here. All right, so rating performance. So a year-end rating is based on the employee's performance during the whole 12-month rating cycle. And it includes temporary assignments that lasted longer than 120 days. If the employee has received a performance eval from another rating official during the current rating period, the rating official must consider that rating when assigning the year-end rating. So sometimes the question that we get is, how do you determine the proportional weight of that interim rating? The rating official should really just look at a few factors, mainly the time that was spent in each of those positions. So if the employee spent a lot of time on that detail, you want to give it a little bit more weight to that interim rating. But there may be some other factors, such as if the work under that detail was really, really complex, you would probably want to give a little bit more weight to the considerations from that interim rating. So there's no mathematically prescribed method for doing it, but you just want to sort of use some rationale, and that's just sort of looking at those factors: complexity and length of time, and the amount of time spent on the other detail or other assignments.
Virgil,
All right,
there's a question in about somebody is promoted through a career ladder, and that promotion occurs after that July 1st. Would they be put under standards before the July 11th to September 30th, or would they be waiting and just use the summary?
So if you have an employee that is promoted to a higher grade through a career ladder position, so this employee should be closed out of the old position and put under, let me see, this happened in the last 90 days of the pay period, say July 10th, should be on 90 standards. So this employee would not have, this employee would have a closeout or summary rating under the old or the lesser rung of the career ladder, and that's going to be a summary rating. So they wouldn't get new standards until the start of the new rating year because they're less than 90 days under the before the closeout of the new rating cycle. So if they receive the career ladder on July 10th, they are going to have a summary rating. That's going to be their final rating for the year, and then standards they can be placed on October 1st under the new career ladder level. Does that make sense? So you would not put that employee under standards between July 10th and September 30th, just to clarify. There's not enough time under that closeout of the year to rate the employee. All right, so rating performance, and I sort of spoke about this in the beginning, but some of the names have changed. So outstanding is the highest, unacceptable is the lowest. Above unacceptable, you have fully successful, and then you have exceed expectations, and then lastly, you have outstanding. So just quick notes about outstanding level of performance. It's just basically performance, superior performance in all aspects of the critical element, and is defined as such high quality that organizational goals have been achieved that would not normally have been achieved otherwise. So this is looking at the employee's critical element involved or elements involved, and just seeing consistently stellar performance. Exceeds expectation, very, very high level of performance that exceeds expectations in many of the significant areas. I think the distinction is a slight distinction between outstanding and exceeds expectations, but outstanding, there's very little room for improvement if you think about it like that. Very little room for improvement. Can everyone improve? Certainly, but at outstanding, this is just stellar. Fully successful, where you must be to maintain your employment with the federal government, just consistently performing, and it's performance that contributes positively to organizational goals. So more than often, these employees are doing the right thing. Unacceptable, obviously, is when they don't more than often perform in an acceptable way. And I can't remember who it was, if it was Kelly or Julie, but oh, it was Connie. So Connie, to your point, if any one element is unacceptable, that employee is deemed unacceptable, and then you would have to move forward with proposing some sort of action. All right, and so any element that the employee did not have an opportunity to perform during the year must be marked as not rated. Elements that are not rated are not used in the calculation of the summary. So if the employee had 4 elements, and as a manager you did not observe that employee under one of those elements, or the employee didn't have an opportunity to perform work under those elements, you'll simply grade the other 3 elements. And then when you calculate it, you're going to only calculate it using those 3 elements, as if that 4th one didn't even exist. In appraising performance, rating officials may not take into consideration, this is very important, any work that was not completed because of an employee's absence for which you as the manager or some other manager approved that leave. So if the employee was on an approved vacation and there was some failure of performance, you cannot use that performance during that time against the employee. And that information is clarified in the new policy. A narrative summary must be written and recorded on every EPAP for each element that is either assigned an outstanding or an unacceptable rating, meaning you must clarify and outline the circumstances that gave way to those ratings. That summary should contain examples of that employee's performance, which substantiates and explains how that performance is unacceptable or outstanding. However, we really strongly encourage you as a matter of habit to put a narrative for all of the levels of performance. It will be very useful in helping you to distinguish between, for example, fully successful and exceed and outstanding. So we encourage it for all of the standards, but it's mandated for outstanding, the highest, and unacceptable, the lowest. All right. Additionally, any rating of either outstanding or unacceptable must be reviewed and approved by the second level reviewing official before, as a manager, you would discuss it with the employee. All right. And a review of the summary rating is not required for either exceeds expectations or fully successful, unless as a bureau, the National Park Service, we mandate otherwise. And so far we have not. So just the highest and the lowest.
Vergil, there's a question on outstanding levels in terms of the organization. Is that at the park level, the regional level, or the nationally? What is actually meant by organizational goals?
If the outstanding level is achieving organizational goals, means the goal of the park, region, or nationally. So this organizationally could fall anywhere between Department of Interior or National Park Service or even Northeast region. So the department left a lot of leeway for us as a bureau to determine if they're going to use the higher department organizational goals or the goals from the Park Service or even from the region, so which could come from the regional director. So there's a lot of leeway there, and it's not mandated that we use any particular one. And let me know if you have any additional questions on that issue. Oh, let me back up here. Sorry about that. So after rating is complete, after you've done the approving, you got the proper signature, the rating official would conduct that meeting with the employee and just sort of discuss what the performance was. Once that discussion is complete, the rating official and the employee sign the EPAP. Remember to get that additional signature if it's the highest or the lowest. As a rating official, you keep the completed and signed EPAP form. You're going to give the employee a copy, and then a copy of that gets sent to the SRO's office so it can be uploaded along with the awards if appropriate. Any event an employee refuses to sign an EPAP or any other document for that matter, we want you to annotate that the employee refused to sign on a signature line, and that rating is still going to be implemented. So the employee's failure to acknowledge or sign that form does not invalidate that final rating. All right, and sometimes when as managers, you draft performance appraisals, and an employee may not be happy, and so they have the option to request reconsideration. And so when an employee is concerned about their rating on any particular element, and this is the important part for reconsideration, if that change of that element would result in a change in the summary rating, and so in other words, if the employee, for example, had an appraisal that was, let's say, 4.4, which would be exceed expectations, and the element in dispute would change that summary rating to outstanding, they would be entitled to request reconsideration rating through the process. However, if the rating would only raise the points but not necessarily that summary rating, so if it went from a 4.4 to a 4.5, just throwing numbers out there, and it didn't warrant a change in a summary rating, they would not be entitled to go through a reconsideration process. Side note, if an employee is covered by a collective bargaining agreement, a CBA, and there's some language in that CBA that speaks to a reconsideration process, that CBA is going to govern the process by which that bargaining unit employee would use. does the original SHRL asks, does the original EPAP go to the SHRL or back to the rating official? So a copy of the EPAP is actually uploaded to the SHRL's database, SHRL. So the original would stay with you as the the rating official maintains that in the employee's performance file. All right, so rewarding performance. So starting with the fiscal year 19, fully successful now makes you eligible. This is new to receive either a cash off, time off award, or some other form of recognition. Additionally, employees who are rated outstanding can now be considered to receive a quality step increase in addition to receiving a performance-based award. So outstanding ratings, two benefits there. And again, all awards are at the discretion of management and based on budgetary constraints. All right, a couple points to remember about rewarding and recognizing employee performance. One size doesn't fit all. Rewards should be tailored, and it should be based on an individual's contribution. When possible, we want you as managers to accommodate that employee's preference. So some employees want time off, other employees would like to take the monetary. Make sure that to the extent possible, we can honor those preferences. You want to be transparent. You want to make sure that you're clearly communicating to employees the types of rewards and conditions for receiving them, what they must do to get this reward or that award, and be fair. Make sure that all employees are treated equitably, and avoid the creation of expectations for awards that will not be made. So you don't make promises you can't keep in terms of rewarding employees, mainly guaranteeing certain amounts or certain rewards in general. All right, so this is really the worst part of your job as management, is addressing poor performance. It's the hardest part, but it is the necessary part. Any questions on this at any time, I want to encourage you all right now to reach out to the Labor and Employee Relations staff, and we're here to sort of consult. We really would like you to speak to us early and often as possible. But in general, supervisors should address unacceptable performance at any time during the appraisal period and should not wait until the end of the period. All right, at a minimum, make sure, as I spoke before, you initiate and document discussions with employees. And what you're looking for is you're trying to identify problems so that you can assist the employee in correcting the deficiencies. So we really, really want you to reach out as soon as possible and get advice and guidance from our staff, very well-trained staff, who can sort of steer you in the right direction. All right, so some more about addressing poor performance. It's usually best to counsel your employees first. It goes a long, long way to sustaining an action later. Start off with identifying what an employee did or didn't do. You document it, you issue it to the employee. That employee is now on notice and they understand what the expectations are. I want to add one thing in here. When possible, when you're counseling employees and it's regarding their performance, tie it into the specific element that performance would fall under. So in other words, if critical element one is getting along with your coworkers and their performance deficiency is that they were not getting along with your coworkers, when you have a discussion with them, you make sure that you let them know that your performance is unacceptable. You let them know what happened, when it happened, and how it relates to their performance. So this ties into your performance under critical element one, which requires that you get along with employees. So very good strategy for documenting is to tie it in with those elements that the behavior belongs under. All right, sometimes that counseling won't work or might be clear already that the employee is at an unacceptable level. And this question came along earlier. There are two means for which we deal with those unacceptable performance problems. And I'll talk about both of them in turn. One is the traditional approach using performance procedures under 5 CFR 432, or the alternative approach, which the president and the secretary are strongly encouraging, is to use under 5 CFR 752, which are conduct rules and regulations. And I'll sort of address both of them a little bit. So Under the traditional approach, 5 CFR 432, this is what most managers who dealt with performance problems would use. It requires that you identify a critical element and establish performance plan that employee is performing unacceptably under, which is why it's important that when you counsel that you identify that element as well. It requires a written notice of opportunity period to demonstrate acceptable performance, which is that opportunity period or the PIP that you give the employee. So you're identifying that they are unacceptable, and then you're providing them a letter stating what those deficiencies are, and that's their trigger for their period to improve. All right. The opportunity period is generally going to be 30 days unless as a manager or supervisor you determine that a longer period is necessary to provide a reasonable time to demonstrate that performance. And so generally you will have this. Some employees have work that you can monitor over very short periods of time. The work is maybe repetitive or something that if they're processing work, this is something that you can monitor over the course of a day or week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then you may have some employees that may take a little bit longer. Let's say they work on project-based work, and a project would generally last 60 to 90 days. So outside of something like that, you generally want to stick to a 30-day period. Side note, if there's language in a collective bargaining agreement that outlines that this time must be longer, we acquiesce to the collective bargaining agreement. All right. If at the conclusion of that opportunity period, performance has not reached fully successful, you are going to work with my labor and employee relations staff to draft up a notice of adverse action. So employees failed the opportunity period, employee remain unacceptable. The next step is now to draft a letter indicating that we intend to remove or demote them. That employee will be provided, it's going to be outlined in a letter, a reasonable time period to reply either orally or written or both. That information would go to a deciding official, which is generally a higher level manager in a process, who would consider the employee's reply as well as the material that led up to the failure, and then that employee would be provided with a decision on whether we sustain or reverse that demotion or removal. Quick thing about performance under this 5 CFR 432 procedure, employees employees have an opportunity to respond in writing. I just lost my train of thought, and it'll come back to me. So let me just contrast with this with the misconduct. So alternatively, you can use the misconduct approach. This is a little bit different than the performance. So here, under normal circumstances, we would use this whenever you address an employee who may have been AWOL or conduct unbecoming. However, it can also be used for unacceptable performance. So what it requires is that an employee was on notice that that employee was expected to perform some particular duty, some standard, or some performance, and that it was unacceptable. So you've put them on notice that you were supposed to move 700 widgets by Friday. When an employee failed to remove those 700 widgets as outlined, you were able to take an action under 752. Now, here's the difference between here and the performance-based action. Under conduct, there is no opportunity to demonstrate acceptable performance. So you do not provide the employees with a notice and a time to improve. You would go right to the written notice of adverse action, and that would be a suspension, a demotion, or removal, or such. You're going to give them 30 days advance notice, similar to the performance procedures. The employee is going to have 7 days to reply. And again, if there's some different language in the collective bargaining agreement, we acquiesce to the agreement, and then the decision is issued. And that decision is either going to sustain that action or not. One of the significant differences between the conduct approach and the performance approach, 432, is that there is a slightly higher, just slightly higher burden of proof for a conduct-based approach versus a performance-based approach. However, the conduct-based approach does not require the opportunity to demonstrate. It just requires that we have documented notice. Additionally, 752 procedures may require sometimes a showing that we've upheld the approach of progressive discipline. We don't necessarily have to progressively discipline, but we want to make sure that in going through a conduct action that we use the lowest form of discipline that would be deemed to correct an employee's behavior. So just some nuances, but the president and the secretary are encouraging conduct procedures when appropriate. And so you can speak to Labor and Employee Relations if you have a question with regards to if your situation is appropriate to use that procedure. All right, some key dates and times. These are very important dates that you want to kind of keep in your memory. So from October 1st through November 15th, this is really the time period that you finalize and sign all of your employee performance appraisals, EPAPs that were from the prior fiscal year. From March through May, this is when you're going to sort of conduct your mid-year reviews. And again, if you have a large staff, you may want to just start off staggering them. Start to do them week by week until you get them done. But you have generally the middle point of the year. August and September is when you start the planning phase for the year-end appraisal activities, gathering your documents, making sure all of your ducks are in a row, contacting Labor and Employee Relations if you're unsure about something, especially if you think that an employee's performance is unacceptable. And this is also when you start to look at developing new performance plans. The good part of that, if you have employees on performance plans, a lot of times they don't change much from year to year, so it may just require some tweaking. But August, September is when you want to at least look at those things to make sure that they are drafted and they have a lot of the language that you want to use. October 1st through October 31st, this is when you're going to secure approvals of the ratings, and you would conduct those appraisal meetings with your employees. And then finally, by November 30th, that's the cutoff date to submit those signed EPAPs to the SHRO, upload, and also the DI 451 awards, so that we'll be in compliance. And that, my friend, is a walkthrough of the new plans, and that's just a walkthrough of the performance management cycle. And please let us know if you have any questions. I think, Dominic, you want to unmute it, or you just want to use the chat feature some more?
We can use the chat. I can try it. It looks like Amy has a question. If it's a written notice of suspension, do you have to wait 30 days to implement the suspension, or is it 30 days? What does that mean? Gotcha.
So, Amy, a suspension, an adverse action, which is where we can either suspend for greater than 15 days or demote or remove, are all adverse actions. So essentially, we cannot, as an agency, effect that suspension no sooner than 30 days. So you have to give an employee a written notice or the proposal notice, the proposal letter. That employee has some time to reply. That reply and other materials are given to a deciding official. They review it, and then they can issue a decision. Just that decision can't be implemented, nor can the suspension be implemented sooner than 30 days from the date of written notice.
So I can try to take things off mute. It may get noisy. Let's experiment. I would encourage everybody to put their phones on mute right now, but we will go ahead and unmute everybody and see how noisy we get.
Some feedback there?
Yeah, a little bit.
Kristen, I see you have a question here. Could you put on, please? I'm looking at Kristen Lassard's question with regard to putting employees on paid leave in the interim. And my question is, can you just clarify what you mean, put them on paid leave in the interim? Waiting for the 30 days. By paid leave, I'm assuming that you mean administrative leave. And so administrative leave gets really, really tricky. It's very, very regulated. In general, we do not advocate for it from the bureau level or the department level and through federal government because it's heavily scrutinized. And so we want to make sure that if an employee is being suspended, generally admin leave is reserved for if we're going to suspend an employee under the crime provision, generally. And what that means is that the employee has done something that may warrant them serving time in jail, and then some other factors. Or it's very egregious, an employee is dangerous or a danger to other employees or himself, something like that may necessitate some admin leave. But generally speaking, we may look at an indefinite suspension first. Admin leave, not generally so. We would generally work with the solicitor's office, and we may recommend moving an employee if potential, if possible. But it really depends on the nature of the misconduct and the circumstances. But in general, administrative leave, we don't like to use it very, very often. If you have any other questions, I'll stick on for a few minutes. You can put it in a chat box, or alternatively, you can raise your hand. I think we can, Dom, we can unmute them if they raise their hand.
We can try.
All right.
For sure.
There's a little raise hand button there. If you have a question, just raise your hand and we can try to unmute you.
Larry Turk. Let's see if we can, I can't unmute Larry because he called in on the phone. So he's one of my anonymous people.
Okay.
Larry, could you put it in the chat?
Yes, please. Will the new guidance be integrated into the civil servant training? One is coming up next week. Dom, do you know if this guy, I don't think this particular, but I'm not 100% sure. Dominic, do you know?
I don't. I believe it's a contractor that does that, but I would imagine they would be on that. They go over the differences between those things.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. All right, Larry's saying right now we're having to wait 6 months to issue conduct-related discipline. Will this speed up under the new policies? Larry, I think I may need a little bit more detail. Are you saying that it's been taking 6 months, or there's been some requirement that? Okay, it's been taking 6 months. It really would depend on the nature of the misconduct. So will this policy speed up the misconduct? Probably not necessarily. This is mostly addressing performance. Performance, you know, I will make no bones about it. Performance, it requires some level of thoroughness. So you need to be able to document really well. That documentation is going to serve a lot. Based on that documentation, and that opportunity period. Now, the opportunity period is absolutely going to be shorter, and under the new policy and some of the new presidential directives, it does allow a much shorter time in us being able to affect actions. It remains to be seen if it will have a major impact this early off. We are encouraged that it will. We're also encouraged with the removal of the minimally successful standard that will be able to affect removal of poor performing employees much, much simpler. I hope that answers your question at least a little bit. 6 months to issue conduct-related discipline. It really depends on what that discipline is. If it's a reprimand, it really shouldn't take that long. If it's a suspension, it largely depends on the complexity of the misconduct and then sort of coordinating with the solicitor's office. So sometimes it can take a bit. Then there's backlogs with the solicitor's office. So I completely sympathize with the time. And that may be something that you can reach back out to me offline and we can talk about. Tom says.
Tom's got unmuted Tom's phone. You there, Tom?
Yes, I couldn't see the raise hand logo, but yeah, going back to the admin leave topic, I was wondering. I know that physical safety is a one consideration. I was wondering if financial risk to the agency is a consideration.
So financial risk, I would say what we would probably want to do is look at the circumstances. And I'm not being vague on purpose. No, I'm being vague on purpose because there's a lot of ways these cases can go. So something like financial risk, we would want to look at what those risks are, and if there are alternatives to the administrative leave. So our first choice is never going to be to recommend putting an employee on administrative leave unless they're dangerous. If they're dangerous, we absolutely want to get them away from employees. If they're not necessarily dangerous, we want to look at alternatives. So there's things that we can do, like putting them on details, assigning them other duties. As management, you have a lot of leeway in what you can affect on an employee, even without necessarily changing their grade and pay or doing a formal demotion. We can move employees around as needed. So.
Well, that's why I use myself as an example, because it's, clearly hypothetical. So there's there's some systems I can access. If I was under removal notice, would that make me a good candidate for this type of thing?
So I know for a fact that you would not do this.
Nope. Nope.
but in the event that you did, is it possible? Yes. We would probably, again, we would look for some other alternatives. So that would be to remove your accesses first, remove your accesses from FBMS, FPPS, PaymentNet, those things where you could sort of get into trouble. If it was more in the agency of the Park Service to put you on admin leave, we would certainly do it in consultation with Labor and Employee Relations and a solicitor's office, but it's genuinely not going to be our first offer. We'll probably want to look at some other things first. Ultimately, it's possible because we have and we do put employees on admin leave, but we try to recommend it very judiciously, and so that we don't have a lot of employees out on administrative leave and paid vacations, and then as an agency we're being scrutinized by Congress. So I guess that's really the rationale.
Thank you.
Okay. Tammy said, when documenting performance of an employee for their folder, whether good or bad, do you have to notify the employee of the documentation that you're placing in their file? So, Tammy, you want to appraise an employee. So here's the thing: if the documentation is going to be used against the employee, you want to make sure that the employee has an opportunity to see that documentation. It's as simple as that. They will be entitled to that documentation at some point or another, legally speaking. So if, for example, you were to take an action against them and we were to demote or remove them, and this documentation that you have was used for you to formulate that the notion to remove or take that action, that an employee would be entitled to that as materials relied upon. So and then again, it's a good strategy to share that with the employee. You don't want to sit before a third party and try to explain why you had documentation that you didn't appraise an employee of. But to answer the question, ultimately you do want to share that with the employee. It's much more effective when the employee is placed on notice than not, and they will ultimately get a copy of the documentation if you're using it against them anyway. Steve Herzog says, we have a CBA that says to provide 90 days to demonstrate acceptable performance before proposing removal, reduction in grade. This gives our employees 90 days to demonstrate acceptable performance. Correct. Steve, excellent example. So this is where there's a conflict between the new department's language and a CBA. So in this case, and I'm assuming that you're reading it, and this is the plain language, we would acquiesce to the language in the CBA. And then what would happen is when it's time to renew this CBA, whether through midterm bargaining or end of term bargaining, we would try to get that new language into the new contract. That's how we would change it.